Gears of War 3 is running on the PlayStation 3. It's amazing to see this in person, and amazing to think that this is actually real. And it's running on my PlayStation 3 development hardware. 10 years ago, creative director of Gears of War Cliff Bleszinski confirmed that Gears of War would not be coming to PlayStation 3 anytime soon. But in some cases, even with an exclusivity contract in place, testing middleware on all platforms is vitally important. Gears of War 3 would be one such game. It ran on Unreal Engine 3, which Epic Games were utilizing on both the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 consoles. In recent times, we've seen some high-profile prototypes released to the public, including GoldenEye for Xbox Live Arcade. But the prototype release of Gears of War 3 running on PlayStation 3 hardware is especially interesting. The Gears franchise has been exclusive to Microsoft ever since its inception. The franchise was developed by Epic and published by Microsoft exclusively for the Xbox 360. The story of how Gears of War 3 for the PlayStation 3 was discovered was outlined by Kotaku back in 2020. But in summary, the game was discovered by a group known as the Xbox Underground, an international hacking group that gained unauthorized access to many different computer networks, including Epic Games. The group had gained full and unrestricted access to Epic's internal network. And it wouldn't be long until they stumbled across the build machine and the NAS drive that would host daily builds. They would also locate the source code server that was running Perforce. With this, they were able to acquire early development builds of Gears of War 3 running on the Xbox 360. On July 2nd, 2011, almost 10 years ago, news had dropped that Gears of War 3 for the Xbox 360 had leaked onto the internet, many months before the official release. This would not be final retail, rather an earlier development build that had been floating around the Xbox Underground group. In fact, the group maintains that they had development builds of Gears of War 3 1 year before the game went retail. The group would then share builds around, and it wouldn't be long before a large dump of Epic's data would leak onto the internet and on torrent sites. A digital archivist by the name of PixelButts would examine the leak files and discovered that there was PlayStation 3 material and pre-built data. According to PixelButts, this data had been circulating for a long time, so it's really not special in that regard, but since nobody handling it dealt with PS3 stuff, and was more 360 oriented, plus the requirement for a dev kit, it pretty much laid there untouched until I showed up 8 years later with a fix, which was somewhat trivial honestly. According to the Kotaku article, Epic confirmed that PlayStation 3 builds were real, and they were a part of the test technology for Unreal Engine 3. This footage is a byproduct of Epic's internal Unreal Engine 3 testing process, which utilized both Gears and Unreal Tournament, and it was never part of any actual product work for PlayStation 3. This is very much in line with a Mark Rain interview from 2007 when he told Eurogamer, PlayStation 3 is very much benefiting from Gears of War. We're a little ahead on PlayStation 3 compared to where we were at the time on Xbox 360. And what I mean by that is our code and our level of completeness. And that's because we've shipped a game with Unreal Engine 3 already. While Gears of War 3 remained exclusive to Microsoft, Epic's build server would generate PlayStation 3 builds of the game for testing purposes, and once the leak had occurred, PixelButts would be the first person to get the data working and release an Epic-made data version of the PlayStation 3 game on archive.org exactly 10 years after the launch of Gears of War 3. Now the good news is, the game is available for anyone to download and try out for themselves, and this is the real deal, running on the PlayStation 3. The entire game is playable from start to finish, including all chapters of the campaign, multiplayer maps including all the different game modes as well. Unfortunately, however, most people aren't going to be able to experience playing Gears of War 3 on the PS3 due to the fact that it requires a PlayStation 3 development kit in order to work. So in order to get Gears of War 3 running on a PlayStation 3, unfortunately the only way that you can do it today is to use a dev kit. Not all dev kits have been created equal either. So for this particular exercise, I'm using a DECR 1400A, which is the development kit that you see here. Now, it looks like a regular PlayStation 3, just a regular fat model, but this is a dev kit. And this is a pretty interesting development kit because it's kind of been pieced together by various different parts of other PlayStation systems, if you will. If you own a PS3 test kit or an exploitable PlayStation 3, unfortunately, the game will not work. You simply require the extra RAM from a PS3 dev kit. Now you might be wondering, why is this the case? After all, both the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3 have 512 megabytes of RAM. But unfortunately, the PS3 RAM is split into 256 megabytes for the system and 256 megabytes for the graphics. This is in contrast to the Xbox 360's 512 megabytes of unified RAM, which can be divided in any shape or form. This would prove to be the right choice. Epic Games famously insisted that Microsoft increase their graphics from 256 megabytes to 512 for its next generation Xbox 360 hardware. Epic would send screenshots to Microsoft of Gears of War if there was only 256 megabytes of memory available, and this had some effect on Microsoft's decision to increase the RAM to 512 megabytes. For those of you wondering if the game is playable on emulation, unfortunately, it is not playable running on RC PS3 either. It gets as far as the title screen before freezing up, but hopefully over time, we may see the game start to become playable. As for the build itself, it's very much a development build running at a somewhat sluggish frame rate, especially when compared to the Xbox 360 original. This is to be expected, of course, as there is not likely too much in terms of optimizations. In fact, the build just utilizes the same Xbox 360 button assets for its menu and user experience. More proof that there was never meant to be a PlayStation 3 release, rather that this version is purely technical to test out the Unreal 3 engine on the PS3, which in general, it's fair to say, had a rough time running on the PlayStation 3 hardware. But I do want to stress once again that this is only a development build, only a test build of this game that was never meant for retail, and there is nothing in terms of optimizations that were ever made for this game. But it is interesting to take an insight and look at Gears of War 3 running on the PS3, especially when we consider the comments that were made by both Mark Rain suggesting that 256 megabytes would not be enough, and they did stress that Microsoft upgrade or enhance their Xbox 360 to utilize 512 megabytes, as well as the comments that were made by Cliffy B that there would never be a PlayStation 3 version of Gears of War. Now, technically, he was right, because obviously none was ever released out into the wild. That is absolutely true. But I also feel like maybe Cliffy wasn't really too aware that there were PlayStation 3 builds of Unreal Engine games being generated on their build servers at any given time. So assuming that you have access to the hardware and you want to take a look at the game yourself, if you are launching the game on your dev kit, you will need to connect up a keyboard via any of the PS3's USB ports. Launching the campaign directly from the menu using the controller would not work for me. And the workaround is to bring up the game console using a keyboard and type in the following command: start gearsgame_p ?chapter = 0, where 0 is the first chapter of the first act. And with this command, you can select and load into any chapter of the game. And that's really all about it. In conclusion, this is a fascinating look at what may have been. I remember reading many arguments online that Gears of War wasn't possible on the PlayStation 3, and technically that's not incorrect. because it does require the additional memory of a development kit to run. But on the flip side, with the appropriate optimizations and memory management, I do feel that the game would have been possible. After all, we've seen other UE3 games running on the PS3, and the smart software engineering team at Epic would have been able to make this happen. Of course, this wasn't to be, but the prototype does give us a taste at that possibility.
The locusts have broken through to his house and he called in to sleep. He says he's sorry. He says...
Now before I go, I want to give thanks to a couple of different people that made this episode possible. The first one is Aqua for sending me out the PlayStation 3 dev kit that you saw in this episode. Without their help, this would not have been possible, as well as Pixel Butts that did give me some important information about the release that he had worked on, as well as members of the Xbox Underground, basically just filling in the gaps and giving me some clarification with the backstory when it came to the Epic hack back in 2011. But we are going to leave it here for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, if you liked it, don't forget to leave me a thumbs up, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye for now.